I love the fact that Harry is also the illustrator and author of children's books, having seen some of that. And in fact, that's where I want to start. Consider it a plug or just my deep appreciation for A Fine, Fine School, Diary of a Worm, and Diary of a Spider. They have put my children to sleep over the years many, many times, and I appreciate that. And again, I encourage you all to check out those books as well as Bailey. And did you say there's a forthcoming Bailey book as well?
Bailey at the museum doing crack. So Bailey at the museum.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Fred, let's start with you.
Hello.
You talk about the arc of a story, and we're going to be talking about that throughout the day. I want to talk also about the arc of a career. And if we look at the inspiration for your career, you started as a novelist, became a journalist. Over the last 12 years, have focused your journalism on a particular topic, perhaps not exclusively. But because I know something about you, I also know that your father was an acclaimed screenwriter. Your father created Mr. Magoo, and your father wrote his first novel, if I'm not mistaken, in his early 90s. Is that correct?
Yeah.
92.
92, yeah.
So can you tell me about that arc and whether it's in your genes and how that got you to your career and where you are?
Well, I think that if my father had been a shoemaker, right, I would have been a shoemaker. I think it's very straightforward, right? I mean, I think that's what you learn. People always, I think the issue here is the idea of learning how to write or learning how to tell a story, to be, put it more broadly, which is that people often want to know, how do you make a story? How do you do this? How does it work? And you can't tell them. It's not easy to tell people how it works, and that's simply because it's a long apprenticeship. And I think that's maybe the answer to the question, which is that, from a very early age, I'm sitting on my dad's knees, like, I got, how do we get the hero out of this situation? What am I going to do here? And then just watching his struggles and his triumphs in Hollywood, making me realize, A, I want to be a writer, and B, there's no way I was going to be a screenwriter.
But you also teach it. I mean, at SUNY, you're a professor of journalism. Do you find that some of the students, it's like, maybe you ought to try water polo, or, everybody can be taught?
I think that, now this is a whole other question. It is a whole other question about education and what you're bringing to the table and dedication. And the bottom line is that I do think that there are certain elements that can be taught. There's no question. My father used to always say, you can't teach writing. I actually disagree. I think there is a lot that can be taught and delivered. And I used to be very arrogant about it. And I used to think, nobody can teach me anything about writing. But that was simply because I had spent years and years and years learning everything about writing, just having it seep into me. So I do think there are certain elements you can teach. However, like anything, if you're going to be a good creator of anything, you're going to have to spend a tremendous amount of time on your own figuring it out.
Jennifer, you showed the Desert Runners trailer. I was first exposed to your work with Motherland. You didn't talk about that, but could you briefly describe the premise, describe the process of making the film, and whether or not the film itself and the process validated the premise of Motherland?
Sure. Am I on? Hello. So Motherland was my last film, and it was, how do I tell this story shortly? Basically, I took 6 women who had all lost a child, and I took them to Africa to volunteer with children there, and we filmed the whole trip. And the idea was inspired. One of the women on the trip was a good friend of mine who had lost her son in a car accident, and I had seen people lose people before. I had lost people in my own life, but I had never seen anyone lose a child before, and it was a very specific and very devastating and intense form of grief. And I also at the time I've always done a lot of volunteer work, and I've always really believed in the healing power of giving. And so I just had this crazy idea, what would happen if I took these people who had all suffered this tragedy, and I took them and gave them the opportunity to give and to do this service trip, and could, it was sort of like me wanting to test my theory, basically. Can giving be a healing thing to do, particularly for people who've experienced a massive loss and tragedy? And so we went to Africa for 3.5 weeks, and we filmed the whole trip. And And did it come true? Is that the end?
Yeah, did it validate your premise?
Yeah, I mean, it did. I really, that film, a lot of times you start with an idea for a story and it becomes something else. And that film, in so many ways, but did prove the theory that I set out to prove, but also opened up so many other things and so many other lessons and so many other experiences and so many other, changes, transformation, which I talked about earlier. And one of the things that I was going to talk a little bit about was the idea that as a story, when you become a storyteller, which I think we all are in some way or another, you're telling these stories and you're telling them about other people, but at the same time, through the process of storytelling, you're changing your own story. My story completely changed through the process of making that film. I will forever be transformed through the process of making that film. I'm now forever transformed in a different way through the process of making this new film. Like, every time I take on this, honor of telling somebody else's story, and I'm sure you guys agree that it changes you inside. And so, yeah, Motherland was a huge learning experience. Probably for me, with that film, I didn't expect that as much as it happened to forever change the way I think. So,
Harry, presumably a basic tenet of storytelling is knowing your audience. Do you create differently when you are writing for your syndicated panel versus single panel cartoon versus creating single panel cartoons for the New Yorker?
No, not really. No. No. The New York. There are certain cartoons that I know won't make it in the New Yorker, that are too provocative, and A Couple in Bed will never go in syndication. But I know that. So in some respects, but it's always about being funny. It's always about the idea first, and then I'll find a home for the cartoon. Playboy, I've published cartoons in Playboy too, so you do have to know your demographic a little bit.
So has the New Yorker caption contest, how has that affected what you do?
Well, it's funny. In this week's New Yorker, I have a cartoon in the caption contest. It's a TED Talk one, so which is funny. It's good. How has it affected what I do?
Has it taken the mystery out of what you do? Has it opened it? Has it democratized cartooning?
In the beginning, the other cartoonists, some of them were very upset about it. They didn't like it, and they thought, well, now we have just the average Joe coming in to contribute to the cartooning process, and why don't we have someone else replace? Let's have the average Joe write a piece of fiction this week. Updike, you're off. You got to take the week off. So they were really upset, but it's become immensely popular, which is great for the magazine, I think. It's extremely challenging. People always come up to me and say it's very difficult to do. And that's something that I do on my own as a cartoonist anyway. I will do drawings probably 20% of the time. I will take drawings and send them to my friends to come up with captions. John's written a few captions. Neil Gaiman's written a couple captions. My wife Sophie has probably sold 3 or 4 cartoons to the New Yorker. So, if you guys want to get on the mailing list, and you're not getting paid, just heads up, you have to sign a waiver.
But you might get published.
Yeah.
But
You might.
it is the hardest thing ever. I have a stack of illustrations from Harry, and my wife and I, we think we're funny, and my wife is a writer, and we draw a complete blank. It is absolutely the hardest thing ever. Jennifer, I want to ask you something particularly relevant to this audience. Corporate sponsorship, corporate financing of documentaries, is there a compromise involved? Does it affect the editorial, the premise of the film, or you're happy to have the money for production?
I'm more than happy to have the money for production, of course. I'm actually pleasantly surprised by how little compromise there is. I find that with this last film, I had a sponsor who funded pretty much 2/3 of the film, one sponsor, and then I have several others, and we're still looking for more if you have any clients who are interested. But Yeah, I find that when a brand can relate to the message of a film, they just want to be a part of it. And I think that's one of actually the special things that's happening right now with branded entertainment. I think it's really, I think it's an amazing opportunity for filmmakers. I know as a filmmaker, I feel like so blessed that there's a new source so that we can continue our work, because they're really, a lot of the old sources have really dried up, and a lot of people can't make films anymore, and it's really been devastating to our industry. So the fact that brands are now starting to see that there's something positive for them in the things that as consumers and as audience members we love, which are movies, is one of them, and the idea that movies could go away as an art form because there's not money for them is a devastating proposition. And so the fact that corporations have seen that just being part of something cool that their audience loves is enough. They don't need a whole bunch more than that. And so sometimes I maybe have to put somebody in a T-shirt and have a shot of it in the movie, but that's about what it comes down to. And it's I'm willing to do that for sure. It doesn't compromise my storytelling. It doesn't compromise what's going on. If they started to ask for much more than that, I might say no.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and different filmmakers have different feelings about it. I'm not interested in people dictating to me what my story is, but I have no problem with a T-shirt or a logo or an end credit. And really, that's all I've been asked for so far, which is amazing, I think. So it's exciting.
Has corporate sponsorship invaded cartooning beyond the New Yorker's Target issue?
No, not in my experience. No.
You ready for it too?
Corporate sponsorship. Is it happening? Do you know something I don't know? No.
You remember the Target sponsored whole issue of the New Yorker?
Yeah. That was
cartoons were-
unbelievable. Oh yeah. That was bad. Yeah, I didn't like that at all. Yeah.
Let's open it up for a couple questions from the audience. Any questions for the panel? Paula Grant.
You all create narrative, but we all walk around with our own stories and narrative, right? And Jennifer, you commented that it does change through our lives, right? What is the value, what do you think is the psychological value of why we need the narrative? Why do we need it? What does it do for us?
I can go back to Film Theory 101. You probably know this, but I mean, everybody will have their own answer to that question for sure. For me, what I sort of was taught and what I believe is that, we're all wondering what the hell are we doing here, right? And so every day we get up in the morning and we go out into the world and we're looking for answers to that question. And stories help us figure that out. They, in film theory class when I was 18 years old, what they taught you is the reason people go to the movies and enjoy sitting in front of a screen for 2 hours is because they're looking for themselves on that screen. They're looking for elements of their own identity so that they can take them home and help piece together their own identity. Now, whether that's, true or not, who knows, but, I think there's an element of truth to all of that. It's like, we're looking for that in other people. We're looking for that, it's like I meet Frederick and it's like, well, what do we have in common? What's he going to say that I can relate to? What's he going to say that I can't relate to? And what does that mean about me? And then how do I go home and then understand myself better? So for me, that's what storytelling is about. It's like, we're all drawn to it, right? And so that is sort of the excitement of it is like, what am I going to learn today about the world and about myself through this story that I read or that I see or that I experience? Because we are all living a story, right? We all have a beginning, middle, and an end, and we all are a character, and something happens to us at some point, hopefully, good or bad, but, things happen every day, and life is a story, and I think it's that process of recreating or creating simultaneously your own life.
Can I just add something to that? Which is that, everybody has their own story, right? But actually, everybody has lots of stories. And everybody can tell many different narratives about themselves depending on the situation, or depending on their mood, or depending on what happens that day. And so everybody's walking around with competing narratives about who they are. And one of the most powerful things about story, when we really understand story, and actually one of the most useful things about actually, let's say, utilizing that story for some sort of other motive, is that stories are reducers. Stories are reducing valves, and because the brain actually takes in so much all the time neurologically, we now understand this, that we need to reduce all the sensory input with where we put our attention. And stories allow us to focus attention. And so that's what is, I think, maybe what we might want to take home with ourselves today, is this idea that there are so many stories. We all have all these competing stories, but if we can tell a good one, if we can tell a compelling one, that's going to reduce attention and focus attention, and then allow us to use that story as some sort of a lever towards a particular kind of action, let's say.
We have time for one, maybe two more questions.
Hello. My question is about the editorial process in terms of how you tell your story. And I guess, put simply, how do you decide what to leave in and what to leave out for the audience to experience the story? Is there any kind of guideline or rule that you follow?
In the case of cartoons, you want it to be stripped down as simple as possible. You want to just get to the gag as quickly as possible. Any superfluous language or anything in there, just chuck it. And you've got to be willing to do, to get rid of it. That's it. That's all I go through.
What I always say, because this is a big issue with student journalism in particular, is that you're always telling the story. In a magazine article, or in a book, or in a short article, or in a long one, or in a movie, or in a cartoon, how many stories is there room for, right? One. There's always room just for one story, and you always have to be telling that story. And so that makes it pretty simple, because anytime you're off, it's out.
We have a joke in the filmmaking world, which many of you might know, which is editing is called killing your babies.
Right.
And it's excruciatingly painful. It's like, I shot 100 hours of footage for Desert Runners, and it's 100 hours of beautiful, amazing, awesome stuff. Like, there's nothing in it that I don't love. And I got to get it down to 80 minutes. And that's a pretty excruciatingly painful ratio. And it's and emotionally, it's like every single day in the editing room is like, let it go, let it go, let it go, like letting it go, and just being very clear, like Frederick just said, what tells the story, what makes it work. If it is somebody said it and somebody else said it, and you love the way they both said it, but only one person gets to say it, you got to pick one. And it's that constant process of picking the best, the strongest, the thing that makes the most sense, and letting go of everything else extraneous.
I say one, just add to that. You have to let go of your ego. You have to go into it as being it's a utilitarian idea that needs to be egoless. You got to get that idea out there and let go of, kill your babies.
And it's just, storytelling is in its essence a discursive form. In other words, essentially, stories go on, right? And so in a way, you're always fighting that discursiveness and reducing and reducing and reducing. And of course, that's what's going to allow somebody to actually get through your story.
Harry Bliss, Jennifer Steinman, Frederick Kaufman, thank you very, very much.